I think it's fair to say that Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan are both giants of their time, right? The two folk legends both share the honour of being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, both are some of the best-selling artists of all time, and both travelled in similar circles throughout their careers, even touring together. Despite this, there's a bit of a feud between the two, or rather one has a feud with the other, and it's not exactly clear why. So let's go through the entire story on this, and if you love classic rock history like me, make sure to subscribe and join our pack. Now, feuds between stars in music is not uncommon, especially those operating in the same circles. As leaders of their genres, it would be just as easy for two performers to see themselves as rivals as friends. Or sometimes a simple slight can turn into something much bigger. I've done several videos on rockstar beefs, which you're welcome to look at up there. But this one's a bit strange. It seems to have come out of nowhere. Was it fizzling in the background for years, or was it a flash in the pan? And is there really any basis for it? In a 2010 interview with LA Times, Joni Mitchell lashed out at Bob Dylan. Bob is not authentic at all. He's a plagiarist, and his name and voice are fake. Everything about Bob is a deception. We are like night and day, he and I. I mean, that was a surprisingly volatile response to a fairly simple question about how both Mitchell and Bob Dylan had created personas for themselves by changing their names. Something very common in the music industry. Apparently irritated, she went on to explain, "As for my name, my parents wanted a boy, so they called me Robert John. When I came out a girl, they just added 2 letters to that. Then I married Chuck Mitchell. I wanted to keep my maiden name. I had a bit of a following as Joni Anderson, but he wouldn't let me." The only people she makes any positive reference towards are a certain Jimi Hendrix and a brief mention of Prince watching her show with big eyes, as she says. You can find the transcript of the interview online, and, well, it is a strange one. Obviously things can be lost in translation, but the tone throughout seems irritated and a bit on edge. And it's not the only time she's made nasty comments about Bob Dylan either. On the 3rd night they stuck Bob at the mic with me, and he never brushes his teeth, so his breath was like right in my face. Now, it's worth mentioning the biography that quote came from has been criticised for being poorly researched, so maybe take that one with a pinch of salt. So what drove her to lash out like that? Well, it's hard to say definitely. She's never actually put forward much of anything else to explain herself. While of course Bob Dylan has been accused a lot for plagiarism, even including his own Nobel Prize speech in 2016, there's a lack of substantial evidence that he's actually plagiarized songs. In his own words of defense, he says it's part of the folk tradition, and he's certainly never been sued for plagiarism. But looking into it, it seems like their relationship might have been poor for some time, or at least a bit up and down. As I said earlier, Mitchell and Dylan go way back, a long way. They moved in similar circles, finding success in the same era and the same genre, although they both had their own spin on things, of course. Unsurprisingly, plenty of comparisons have been made between the two. Both are known to be prolific songwriters with huge discographies. Both are also known to tackle complex issues of their time, such as political and social problems. And of course, they both have a knack for writing hugely successful songs. Joni is credited as being one of the most influential female artists of all time, whilst Dylan is known as one of the best-selling artists of all time, and revered with an almost godlike status by his fans. For some reason, though, it seems to rub Mitchell the wrong way when people compare her to Bob Dylan. One story from way back could have sparked something in her. According to the stories, in the early 70s, Joni was working on her album Court and Spark, which would be released in 74. At the time, Mitchell was living with David Geffen, owner of the record label Elektra/Asylum, and her on-off partner. Geffen had recently signed Bob Dylan to this label, bringing the two stars into much closer contact. Now, reportedly, Mitchell played Bob Dylan a preview of the album at a party, and his response was less than enthusiastic. He actually fell asleep. Now, you can imagine how this might cause some insult for Joni Mitchell. Artists are well known for their pride in their music, and aren't exactly known to take criticism lying down. Joni was building quite a name in her own right by this point, and it was well deserved. But was that apparent snub enough for her to hold a grudge all these years? Without knowing her personally, it's hard to know, but of course it doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility, especially with the vitriol she would later direct at him. Either way, she agreed to tour with him the next year on his famous Rolling Thunder Revue, which would later become a movie. The tour was a big milestone in Dylan's career and featured several other big names as well. And according to most accounts, Dylan was brilliant on that tour. But some reportedly noted he wasn't always the easiest to be around. Sam Shepard, who documented the tour in photos and with a tour log, wrote this: Dylan has invented himself. He's made himself up from scratch. That is, from the things he had around him and inside him. Dylan is an invention of his own mind. The point isn't to figure him out, but to take him in. He gets into you anyway, so why not just take him in? He's not the first one to have invented himself, but he's the first one to have invented Dylan. Now, in fairness, I wouldn't say that has any particular inflection, but it does tie into claims Mitchell made years later that Dylan was unauthentic and wears a mask of sorts. Did she hold a dislike for him this entire time? Because before she called him a fraud, she admired him. She complimented his work on many occasions. Perhaps, though, considering herself the opposite of this, it's insulting to be compared to him. In a later interview in 2013, she tried to downplay and even deny the claims whilst also pointing out her own originality. And in fairness, if you take pride in your original ideas, your performances, it would sting to be compared to someone who you don't rate quite so highly. I think it's worth mentioning as well that Joni Mitchell has had a long, hard road of a life. It's really quite remarkable that she's achieved what she did with the hand she was given. And as any underdog knows, that can give you a bit of a spiky temperament. Now, this interview is actually really interesting and at times a bit sad to watch. Mitchell seems frustrated and confused, sometimes not making a whole lot of sense and struggling to put her point into words. I'm going to show a few key points here. It gets off to a rocky start with a fairly simple question.
Is it realistic, Joni, for a contemporary music artist to not be a copycat of some sort?
Yes, I'm not a copycat. What am I? I'm pretty original.
And soon devolves.
Where's the line between learning lessons from our predecessors, our musical heroes, and being a copycat?
Well, tradition is a copycat, and most people love tradition. I'm not saying, like, that's what sells. So please, what I need, I'm not proselytizing what I need. I need, because of my birthday, to discover. Not everybody has that birthday or that need, and most people are perfectly content. And 99.9% of the musicians sat in their room, picked a hero, and emulated it, and tried to cop that sound or that this or that. That's not my approach. Right. I approached it like a painter with a painter's need to be an original. And that's not a normal need in music, nor am I saying be like me. I'm not.
It seems she's basically saying other artists, presumably including Dylan, copied others and that she doesn't. That she's different from those artists. She doesn't like being billed as the same or even compared. Although the interviewer didn't actually compare her to anyone in the interview. Soon after, she flatly denies her claims in the previous LA Times interview.
Like in 2010 about Dylan, when you have Bob Dylan, you say he's not authentic at all, he's a plagiarist, his name and voice.
Oh, wait, I didn't say that. I didn't say that he's not authentic at all. That is not a word I use. No,
that was from the LA Times.
Yes, okay, that's journalistic bullshit,
She talks about that interviewer for a while before ending with this.
No, and that remark is completely out of context. The interviewer was an I went into that thing about the actor, the thing that we've been through here, and he accused me of being unauthentic. Now that's just ignorance. So I'm talking to a guy, how do I explain to this moron whose IQ is somewhere between his shoe size and his knees, and he's misconstruing everything I say. I'm doing this for John Kelly, who's impersonating me. I hate doing interviews with stupid people. This guy's a moron.
In fairness, you can't blame her for getting annoyed at that original interviewer. If you watch the whole clip or read the transcript, she might have a point. The interviewer did seem to be hounding and antagonizing at times. She also hints at ill health and having nerves worn thin contributing to her response, and that we do not want to talk to stupid people, as she says. Which is another fair point. Who does like to talk to stupid people? But why then did she take aim at Dylan specifically? It seems almost like those feelings were already locked and loaded and ready to go. And the frustration at a rude interviewer caused them to spill out in some sort of emotional rush. She seems like she's about to set the record straight, but then this.
I like a lot of Bob's songs. Musically, he's not very gifted. He's borrowed his voice from old hillbillies. He's got a lot of borrowed things. He's not a great guitar player. you know, he's invented a character to deliver his songs. Sometimes I wish that I could have that character, you know, because, you know, you can do things with that character, you know, it's a mask of sorts.
Yeah, she really isn't a Dylan fan, is she? But is there any tangible evidence to her claims? Well, not really, at least not that I can find. And it's kind of telling that Mitchell hasn't volunteered any examples either. The closest reference I can find is one story of when, early in his career, a music critic cornered Dylan and told him this: "You're a fake. You're never going to be Woody Guthrie, so just stop it." This was seemingly at a time when Dylan's music was cutting it a little too close to Woody Guthrie. For his part, Bob Dylan has remained silent on the entire affair. He hasn't offered any defense or fired any shots back. I suppose whether this implies guilt or that the whole thing is beneath his attention really depends on your opinion. In any case, it's a fascinating angle on a relationship of two of the greatest who have ever done it. I wonder what other secret feuds have gone unnoticed in the music world. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see some more of my work on other rivalries in the rock world, you can find an entire playlist of them right here.